Good evening, friends. Welcome you all to Shakescene, a 6-month-long reading circle on Shakespeare. I'll just give you a brief idea about how the reading circle is going to work and the why we started this reading circle, and then we can move on to our inaugural talk by Dr. David Wesley. Um, we've titled it as Shakescene, taking the name of a chapter out of Stephen Greenblatt's book called Will in the World. And we start with Shakespeare, perhaps because in the history of not just theater, but in the history of literature itself, if there's one name that's come to dominate, it is Shakespeare's. And there are so many unanswered questions which have been asked throughout ages, and which critiques and theater enthusiasts have tried to answer. But regardless, these questions, we still keep asking these questions. Questions like, what makes Shakespeare so universal, or what uh, what 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 makes Shakespeare so immortal? Is he just a product of the colonial enterprise, or which made him popular across the world? Is he a mainstream writer who just catered to the popular audiences in the London of his time, as opposed to the university wits who were writing sophisticated plays? And these are certain questions that people have tried to answer, but there are no answers. And to engage with Shakespeare, I think these are certain questions that we'll be looking at when as we move forward with this reading circle. And as for the selection of texts, we have selected 6 texts based on the genres. But again, we'd like to make something clear. Like most of us know, the first collection of Shakespeare's play as a collection was released in 1623, called Mr. William Shakespeare's Comedies, Tragedies, and Histories. Since then, there is this tradition of classifying Shakespeare's plays as histories, comedies, and tragedies. But we must understand that Shakespearean genres are not static and they're dynamic. So, for example, what is considered to be a history play, Richard II, is as much a tragedy as, say, Macbeth. And Shakespeare, like we all know, in all of his plays, negotiates between these generic terms. So a play is both a comedy and a tragedy and so on. So it's not as simple, but and that is, I think, reflected in our selection. So we have genres like romantic comedy, a problem play. So we'll be looking at that as well. So it's not that these genres are fixed or that they are static. We've just chosen these texts from these genres for the simple reason that it would be a comprehensive reading. These genres are static, are not static, but rather dynamic. For instance, when we were compiling the list, Wesley sir told us that Hamlet could be a problem play. So I think that's something that Wesley sir can talk about after his talk. So we want to thank the professors who helped us in compiling these texts, Professor Wesley, Professor Sam, and Professor Hema. So on that note, we will begin. The 6 texts are Richard II, Romeo and Juliet, Twelfth Night, Measure for Measure, Macbeth, and The Tempest. So we'll be beginning with Richard II in January. The first session on Richard II will be on January the 10th, which is a Friday. So on that note, we'll move on to the inaugural talk. I don't think I have to introduce Sir. All of us know Sir. So Dr. Dave Wesley is an assistant professor in the Department of English Aid at Madras Christian College. Sir is a student of Professor Rajani, and he teaches theatre, acts and directs plays. So I think he's the most qualified because Sir has taught Shakespeare, Sir has directed Shakespeare, and he has also acted in Shakespeare's plays. So we're so glad that Sir has accepted this request to come and give this inaugural talk. I welcome Dr. David Wesley to give the inaugural talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Sagar. Thank you for the brief introduction. And I'm very pleased to see that Sagar and his team, the Frogs Theatre, is making this attempt to read Shakespeare in a span of 6 months, various texts. And I'm sure this is going to really be a very important moment in your lives. And I'm sure it'll be, your lives before these 6 months and after these 6 months, because Shakespeare and the texts of Shakespeare will have such an impact in your, lit, life of, literature. Now, uh, without further ado, let me go into the inaugural talk. Mm, When Sagar was talking about the idea about reading Shakespeare, I was thinking about giving this talk a kind of a title. I went around, thought about it. Then I came back to the original idea of reading Shakespeare. So I'd like to talk about the word reading. It's a very important word when we say reading. And what the Frogs Theatre is doing is reading, um, something that we have been losing the habit of reading. When I say losing the habit of reading, I mean the very literal habit of reading, the literal meaning of the word reading. We just don't read these days, and that's a case for concern. And what the Frogs Theatre is doing is trying to fill that gap. And the number of students who are here now uh, taking part in these reading sessions will always be benefited by these kinds of reading sessions. Now, to go into the title "Reading Shakespeare," can I share? Yeah, I think I can share. There is a share button, and let me know if you can see my screen. You can see my screen,
Yes, sir.
right? So I I asked myself this question: what do I look for while reading Shakespeare? And to a great extent, we who live in the 21st century, or many of our predecessors of the previous century and the previous 2 or 3 centuries, have been more bombarded with the criticism of Shakespeare than Shakespeare, the texts of Shakespeare himself. So it is very difficult for us to really shake off the influence of the critics, right from Green and Ben Jonson till the latest critical work that appears and still appearing every year. We can find some book or the other, a new interpretation of some old play, and this is an important track that we do notice often. And this particular session, I thought, let me not really focus on the critics, because that kind of keeps changing from time to time. The Shakespearean criticism that we have in 21st century or 20th century is not the same that it was there in the early 1900s, and then likewise in the past as well. In other words, every age creates its own Shakespeare by the way it reads it. So even though that particular aspect of Shakespeare, the changing and being relevant to all times, the universalism that Sagar was hinting at, those things are important while we talk about Shakespeare. But there is something very concrete that we have in our hands, that is the texts of Shakespeare. And when we want to use the word reading Shakespeare, I think we need to look at the texts of Shakespeare quite seriously and see how can we read a Shakespeare's text? What are the things that you can look for while reading Shakespeare? Not a criticism, but his text. So these are the 4 points. There are several points I wanted to speak of, but I think owing to time limit, I limit myself to 4 points. And the first one that we encounter when we look at Shakespeare text is the language. And when we talk about language, when you are reading so much of so many other works, especially modern works, and if you have started reading Shakespeare, the first thing that really puts you off guard probably is the Old English, or not technically the Old English, but the English that during Shakespeare's time, the way it was written. So it might in the beginning seem very difficult, and some words have a completely different meaning during Shakespeare's time, and during our times, probably that word isn't used at all or used in a different sense. For example, the word clever is used in a very positive sense in Shakespeare to a great extent, but uh, in modern days, the word clever is usually to refer to somebody being very sly and wily in a negative sense. And likewise, the word nice, for that matter, is also got a connotation in Shakespeare's time. If someone is called nice, then it also means that they are a fool. So if you want to call somebody a fool, you can call him nice. But we use the word nice in a very positive sense. So, and in many ways, these kinds of words, there are some words that today mean something, but they would have meant in a certain context something else. For example, velvet. Velvet is cloth, a kind of a soft cloth. It is still a cloth in Shakespeare's time, but he uses in a certain context to refer to a sexually transmitted disease. So you can see that contextually or in the sense of the English, growing English during his time, it would have meant something else. So the first aspect that you grapple with when it comes to reading Shakespeare, the semantic level of some of the words, some of the expressions, it's going to be a little hard in the beginning. So I'm talking to beginners who are trying to get hold of a Shakespeare text and try to understand the language. So that's that's where what should we do at that point of time? Then it's important to go for notes. It's important to go for commentaries by other scholars, editors, and how they looked at each word and what it means. What are the multiple meanings of that word, and how Shakespeare probably would have played with some of the words. So this kind of a training might be necessary in the beginning for someone to read Shakespeare and and not grapple with it for too long. So if you have books that has a paraphrase on one side and the original text on the other side, those kinds of texts would be really useful. So Oxford school textbooks would be there. Oxford comes up with the plays where they take the difficult words or words that are no more in use and give them some meaning or an explanation on one side. And when you read those kinds of texts, first thing that happens to you is that you are not threatened by that language, by the inaccessibility of that language. You are fine with the words that are being used. Once that hurdle is passed, then it becomes really interesting. So unless we pass this hurdle, it might look like, oh, Shakespeare is just too difficult. Who said he is very easy to read or anything? But all those professors of English who have taught Shakespeare for several years, when they claim that Shakespeare is probably the one who's written much in much simple English and everything, it's because they crossed this line. They crossed this passage, having read it again and again, looked at all the notes, glossaries, and all these things, and that's why they're able to look at the simplified or the simplicity of Shakespeare's language. So that's on one side. Now that's at a semantic level. We have problems at the semantic level. We know how to solve it now. You'll have to look for concordances and other kinds of support texts to for us to cross over the semantic level. But there is another level to Shakespeare's language. This you might miss out even if you get the semantic level. You might miss out the dramatic level of the usage of Shakespeare's language. And much of Shakespeare's language is quite riddling. I don't understand. Sometimes I think the riddling is more for us rather than for his own time. In during his own time or for his audience, it wouldn't have been much of a riddle. Uh, but it is quite riddling for us, and we have to really sit down and do kind of a bit of a calculations to understand the dramatic dimension of the language. So we'll look at that part. Then I would like to look at Shakespeare as the playwright and the dramatist. I want to separate those two things because I see the playwright as somebody who is somebody who designs the entire play, the structure of the entire play, the decision to divide them into 5 different acts, and the decision to start with this moment and to end the act at this level and to begin the second act at that level. those decisions, and who enters in where, and what kind of scene is placed in between what scenes, these kinds of things are important for us to understand one of Shakespeare, at least, one of Shakespeare's plays, any one of Shakespeare's plays, to put that into context. The overall design is important. That's where he is a builder of a play. So I would like to connect the word playwright with shipwright. A shipwright is somebody who builds a ship, and a playwright is somebody who builds a play. That means there are different scenes and different acts, and how he fits them in such an order, and the way he wants the play to look like. For example, why is Hamlet such a lengthy play, and why is what was that Macbeth a very it is the shortest tragedy? So it has to do something with what he believes in to be the theme of that play, and how he wants it to look like, the length and the size of the play. And you can see some of his fourth acts and fifth acts are shorter, fourth acts are very lengthier, and first acts are shorter than second acts. These things are important for us to look at how he's going to build a play. Then the second aspect within that second point is the dramatist. The dramatist is different from the playwright, because we are going to look at specific moments in a play which are very dramatic. How he is able to build that dramatic moment, that is what we're going to look at. So this is where we kind of understand Shakespeare a little more. So language, then language at two levels, semantic and dramatic. Then the second part is we are trying to divide the playwright and the dramatist, and we can see both of them quite revealed in the plays as well, that we are going to discuss some of the examples. Then I would like to also talk about the opening scenes of plays, then also scene openers, the first line of every scene. So I'll just give a couple of examples. The examples are written there. We'll talk about them when uh, when when we come to that part. Then the fourth part, I would like to also see how there is no special space given to texts of Shakespeare's where stage directions will be there. The idea that stage directions could be written down while writing a play is a much later idea, where someone like Ibsen or Shaw would write pages and pages of stage directions, and then go to the conversational part. But Shakespeare had no idea of such a kind of a playwriting, and therefore he had embedded stage direction into the lines that the character speaks. If you see any of Shakespeare's plays or many of the Western plays, it's all conversations to a great extent. They're all conversations. They have to do everything within the conversations. And Shakespeare is a master in using the mode of conversations to do a lot of other things in the play. He would build costumes within the conversations. He would also give directions, stage directions within the lines of one of the actors about how the makeup should be done or how one should walk. All these things are also can be found in in the embedded stage directions. So these are the four things that we are going to look at. Okay. Like I said, we for the semantic one, we may have to look at the glossary, comments, notes by uh, editors. Now look at this particular expression, "Aroint thee which the Rumphedronian cries." Now this is a line from scene 3 or 4 from Macbeth, first act, where the witches are talking among themselves before Macbeth and Banquo arrive, and they were talking about, hey, where have you been? What have you been doing? In that conversation, one of the witches says, look, there was the sailor's wife who was eating chestnuts. I went and asked for her to give me some chestnuts, and she kind of, shooed me away. She didn't give it to me. And then I said, and that's when she said to me, "Aroint thee, which the Rumphedronian cries." This is the line that one of the witches is telling about the sailor's wife, who shooed her off by saying this line, "Aroint thee, which the Rumphedronian cries." Now I have to look for aroint. What's the meaning of the word? So I'll have to go for some dictionary. and you won't find that in the dictionary. So you'll have to get the help of some editor, somebody who recorded that word and found a meaning for that. Or even during Shakespeare's own time, it wouldn't have been worthy enough to enter into the dictionary. It may have been a colloquial term, and some editor of his times or someone like a new historicist critic would have found out the meaning of this word. So around thee is like get thee away, go away, something like that. So that's the meaning. You would get it from some critic. And then the rump-fed Ronian cries, and then that's when you look at the word rump-fed. Now you will probably go and look for the word rump in the dictionary, and then you'll find it's the buttocks. And then when you say rump-fed, then you probably can now make sense of it's probably she's saying you're a fat buttocked woman. And Ronian is usually again a colloquial term for a woman, and and not a very respectful way of and the spelling here it is Ronian, but in other editors they've used Ronian, Ronyon. So these are subtle things, but if we pay attention to these things, we kind of get into Shakespeare's own times, how they use the English language, and how he kind of picked it up from the people. So just as how much Shakespeare was using very sophisticated language in the poetry, in all these soliloquies you'll find Hamlet or Macbeth using, he also has scenes where common people come on stage, common characters from everyday life, they come on stage and then they use the language of everyday life. And those languages probably would never have entered any dictionary. It's for us to go and find that travel will help us to really break open the language barrier when it comes to Shakespeare. So this is just one example I'm giving you. There are several examples like that. The example that I told you is the velvet was also there in Measure for Measure, and some other plays like that. Now that's the first level. That's a semantic level. Now let's look at the dramatic level of the use of language. Now there is a scene in Hamlet where um, Claudius has begun to talk about the present situation, and he kind of explains. I think this is the second scene. Explains in the court, first act. Second scene, he explains in the court to the courtiers how his brother died, and then how he had married his brother's wife, and he's trying to use the language of equivocation. With one dropping eye, and with dirge in marriage, and with mirth in death, or these kinds of the mirth in funeral, these kinds of language of equivocation he uses. And then he starts to address the political issues of that time. He first addresses the issue with Norway. He finishes that part. He'll send, I think, Voldemort or some, I think, Cornelius or somebody to Norway with a letter. That's the first part he does. Second part, he goes to Laertes. Laertes wants to go back to France to study, continue his studies. He gives him his blessing. He goes away. Then he turns to Hamlet. Actually, the issue should be Hamlet's issue is the bigger issue. It has to be addressed, at least from Hamlet's point of view for us, because Hamlet is the title of the play, or he's the hero of the play. Perhaps that seems to be the important issue that has to be addressed. But for Claudius, that's the last point. Now, keeping it for the last can also be kind of looked at in a very positive sense, that it's very personal. It's a family issue. So he would like to finish off with all the professional work and then come to the family issue. When he comes to Hamlet, he'll say, why are you so sad? You are our chiefest courtier, our cousin, and our son, something like that, he would say about him, being, although you're my brother's son, you're my son, something like that, he would say. And for that, Hamlet responds, a little more than kin and less than kind. Now, this is a very riddling line to most of us. It probably can mean more than one thing. So when he says a little more than kin and less than kind, uh, what can that mean? Now you can think of it. You can divide that into two halves. A little more than kin. Now I was a nephew to you earlier. Now I'm your son because you married my mother. So I'm a little more than kin now. I've been kind of a second line relative. Now I've become a very close relative, very, in the very first line itself. And less than kind, uh, I am more human than you are, maybe he's trying to suggest, or you are more human than I am. So you can see that kind can be, he's talking about the human kind. One of them is not as human as they used to be. So he's a little more than kin and less than, I'm not your kind. You are a beast. That's what he's probably trying to say. I'm human. You are a beast. You could just marry my mother just so quickly, or after my father died. So it can be that I'm more your kin because you married my mother, but I'm not your kind. So that could be one way of. So if you have to understand this, you probably have to sit down and try to be quite calculative and do kind of a solving a riddle kind of a line. And a similar one you can find in Macbeth when they talk about so many things. And Macbeth is talking about giving a soliloquy, and by the end of the soliloquy, he says, "Nothing is but what is not." And I do struggle with this line every year. Every year it kind of means something, and then the next year it means something else, or it doesn't mean anything. So as of now, let me look at this. Nothing is but what is not. Okay, let's try to understand that. I recall to get some support for me to look at this portion quite in a deep way. I go back to another portion in Shakespeare where he's talking about the word nothing when Cordelia refuses to flatter her father King Lear, when he's asking her, okay, Cordelia, tell me how much you love me. Goneril and Regan, they used big words. What are you going to say? And Cordelia says, nothing, my lord. And he's getting very angry and he says, what, nothing? Yes, my lord, nothing. And that's when he says, nothing comes out of nothing. And I stop with that line and think about it. What does he mean by that? So you kind of start philosophizing here. When you start talking about nothing, what can you talk about? Nothing means nothing. If it becomes a topic for a discussion, if it becomes the theme of a play like Waiting for Godot, what do they talk about? If it's nothing, there should be nothing. And we shouldn't be talking about it. So we kind of are in a riddle, a little bit of a riddle there. And so now with that thought in my mind, I come to this. Nothing is but what is not. Okay, so let me make a mathematical calculation. Okay, nothing is equal to, what does he mean? Nothing is equal to what is not. Right. Nothing is equal to what is not. It's not there. That's why it's called nothing. But I'm still confused because there is a word called but in between. Oh. So whenever but comes in between, it's going to really trouble the previous portion of the sentence. That means whatever is being said, it will turn it upside down. That's the function of the word but. If you take a sentence which has a but in between, whatever has been said so far until but is going to be toppled. It's going to be, inverted or cancelled out, because but is a word that can do that. Its function is that. So now you look at that word but so seriously and then try to understand this. Okay, nothing is. Let's take that as a statement. Nothing is. Stop it. Think of it as a statement. Nothing is. How can be nothing is? Okay, nothing cannot be. So if you take the word is means there is something, the existence of something. So the moment you say nothing is, it's quite contradictory. And so that contradiction is embedded into the word but. Nothing is but what is not. So at the end of this line, we kind of realize that Shakespeare has probably given a is a forerunner to Beckett in that sense. Beckett has this ability to talk about certain things, use words for certain things, just don't mean anything by them. And a seed for Beckett to really develop it in his plays, particularly Waiting for Godot, is already there in Shakespeare. And I think Kirtana is here. She worked on Beckettian Shakespeare and Shakespeare in Beckett in her MA thesis. And you can see that this idea is quite relevant for that. Perhaps, yeah, I often wonder myself, probably I'm overthinking a lot. It's just what it is. Nothing is but what is not. Yeah, it's true. But I think you go a lot deeper into the dramatic uh, level where contrasts are used to really create a drama, because if there is no contrast, if there is no conflict, there is no drama. And that's why I find that Shakespeare uses the simplistic languages, appears to be small words, nothing is but what is not, but there is so much to talk about. And I think this is the very uh, base of his dramatic thinking. And that's where I want to get confused with these kinds of words, because that's where I can extract his dramatic mind and see if that can be translated onto stage. So that way there are several words, several terms that he uses that becomes quite difficult to talk about in detail, but that's something that makes me think very often. For example, another portion that I would like to recall is this, mm, whose murder is yet but fantastical. Okay, let me see if that, yeah, this is an interesting portion, how he uses this idea of, really riddling it and making it difficult for the reader. I think it's modern reader like me who have this riddling portion, and then I have to really, unknot it for myself. So here is, look at this. Two truths are told, and all that lines go. And then he's talking about contemplating murdering Duncan. This is Macbeth contemplating uh, his contemplation of murdering Duncan. That's going on, and that's what he means by my thought. So if you see my cursor, it's there at my thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise and nothing is but what is not. So I want to look at this particular portion. It says, whose murder yet is but fantastical. So what he has done here is that uh, he has a thought. His thought is about, he contemplates murdering Duncan. So murder is the object of his thought. He wants to do this. He wants to murder Duncan. That's what it. And now what Shakespeare does is he qualifies uh, the very action. He takes that and then turns it around to the very thought itself. The thought is about to murder, and then he says, I cannot murder this thought. I cannot stop thinking about murdering Duncan. That's what he wants to mean. And then look at how he kind of twists it in such a way. He wants us to sit down and really unknot it. Uh, my thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical. Fantastical is here being very, unrealistic. You cannot, you know, stop thinking about murdering Duncan. That's what he means. And he uses the very word to what thought it is. It's a thought about murder. And what cannot he do? He cannot murder that thought. It's something that really fascinates me, troubles me most of the time. And I struggle with that. I sit with that and work on those aspects and see this aspect leads me towards really imagining a stage for this kind of a phraseology, this kind of patterning the sentence. how can I now use that on stage? Because it's something I cannot miss now. It's quite troubling, quite riddling. This riddling aspect of Shakespeare's language, uh, how can I now deliver it to the audience so that they'll get this? That's where Shakespeare kind of enlarges himself for me. Now, a similar line I can find in Hamlet, which talks about canon. Yeah, I'll look for that. Wait. Self-slaughter. Okay, this is Shakespeare saying, oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, as it says, thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. Okay, now look at this. Shakespeare, I mean, Hamlet is contemplating suicide because he just found out that his mother is married or married already, Claudius. And it is the scene after, or the portion after, both Claudius and Gertrude talk to him, and Gertrude tells him, look, Hamlet, I don't like you going back to Wittenberg to study. I want you to be here and be in front of me. And Hamlet also surprisingly to Claudius agrees and say, yeah, I'll be, I'm not going back. And so Claudius becomes very happy that Hamlet agreed to stay back. He'll say, okay, we'll drink to this. And he takes Gertrude away out of the stage, and Hamlet is alone when he says these lines. Then he wishes that his too solid flesh, now in certain places it's called solid flesh, in certain places it's sullied flesh, would melt and thaw and resolve itself into a dew. Or at least he either wants to die, something just kills him, or at least he wants to kill himself. Now, the thought, let me kill myself, that thought, look at how it's twisted here. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. So the everlasting is God. God has given a rule. That's the meaning for rule. Got another word called canon. Canon means a rule, right? A precept, a kind of a commandment given by God. So God has given a commandment against suicide. You cannot kill yourself because you belong to God. Now that troubles Hamlet. Hamlet does not want to kill himself because he would be sinning against God. That's why he said, I wish God had not given this commandment against suicide. That's what he means it. But he uses a word, God has fixed his canon against self-slaughter. Now, if you look at the word canon, another word for another meaning for the word cannon is this huge tanker which has these bombs. Like if you you use them against the enemy, it's a thing that you use in the it's an ammunition that you use against the enemies in a war. So it's cannon. So cannon is something. It seems like God has fixed his cannon not against an enemy to kill them, but against humans who are thinking of suicide. Look at that twist. How logically it's so twisted. I want to kill myself, and God is against it. And how is He against it? He has put a cannon against me. I really want to kill myself, but God is going to kill me if I kill myself. Okay. So by using the word canon in two senses, the commandment of God and God's ammunition against you. So what is the second meaning of canon? God's canon against you, killing yourself. If you killed yourself, God will kill you eternally, put you in hell in eternal damnation. That is there. So you can see that by just using one word canon in the right place and very conscious of its two meanings, he's able to create this drama. So it's a textual drama that we cannot miss out. So if you're doing Shakespeare, you'll have to really look at the drama that is there in the semantic and the dramatic aspect of the language, its double meanings, its word plays, and see how that can be transferred onto stage. For us to even to begin thinking about transferring it onto stage, we need to really look at the text in such a detailed manner. Something else came to my mind and went off. Yeah, I remember Macbeth saying this. Look at this phrase. Macbeth has committed murder. His hands are full of blood and he's starting to feel guilty. And then he says this line, "Ha, what hands are these? Ha, what hands are these? They pluck out mine eyes." This is the line that he says. "Ha, what hands are these? They pluck out mine eyes." Now, it's almost as if Oedipus would say something like that. It's almost a reference to Oedipus. If you look at Duncan as a father figure to both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, because there are instances where that kind of a reference is given, that Duncan is the temple of God, his body is the temple of God, it is ruined, it is desolate. Once his body is dead, it's almost as if the temple of God is dead. So in that sense, is Duncan's got the father figure element to it, and these two are as the children. In that sense, you can also look at as a Duncan Macbeth Lady Macbeth relationship as God Adam and Eve kind of a relationship. Now, in that context, if you look at this, "Ha, they pluck out mine eyes," if Macbeth killed his father, like Oedipus killed his father, then the resulting destiny of an Oedipal sin is plucking out one's own eyes. So that's reference, okay, but it doesn't stop there. The Greek reference, if it's stopping there, then we'll be all right. But the fact that they have a God Adam and Eve relationship makes it slightly biblical, and therefore we need to look at the plucking out eyes into the biblical dimension also. That's where it becomes interesting. Plucking out eyes in the New Testament, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about the eye is the light of the body, and if your eye is single, the whole body is single. When he means single, he means the integrity of the eye. And if it is not, it is better for you to pull out your eye and go to the kingdom of God with one eye. So that's when it becomes like Shakespeare is referring, he's using only one time, "pluck out mine eyes," but at the same time referring to a Greek mythological context and also a biblical context, the Sermon on the Mount. Now, in this one line, what happens is the classical and the medieval combine. When the classical and the medieval come together, that's Renaissance. That's how you understand that. That's the point where you can see that Shakespeare is trying to create, if not the confusion of Hamlet. In Hamlet, it's a confusion. It's a dilemma between the classical and the medieval. So to be or not to be, in that sense, is like to be Christian or to be Roman or Greek, because in the Roman literature, revenge is glorified, but when it comes to the Christian worldview, revenge is God's. Revenge is mine, saith the Lord. So if you combine that, then the dilemma is more the Elizabethan man, the Renaissance man. In Hamlet is a confusion, is a dilemma, but in Macbeth, it's come together in that sense. They kind of coexist in Macbeth. So that's an interesting way to look at all this. All these readings that we have is only through the language of Shakespeare. So that's at one level. So we are looking at, we just finished with we haven't finished with even the first point. There's so many points that I would like to talk about. Maybe look at one more thing in the first part with the dramatic part. For example, Claudius is speaking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I think in Act 2, Scene 2, and trying to convince them to talk to Hamlet and find out what his problem is. Why is he behaving in this strange manner? And so I would like to read that part. Just tell me what time am I doing, what am I doing for time? If it's too late, then we'll stop at some point. Now, this is the king talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Listen to me when I read this. Welcome, dear Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Moreover, that we much did long to see you. The need we have to use you did provoke our hasty sending. Something have you heard of Hamlet's transformation? So saith nor the exterior nor the inward man resembles that it was. What it should be, more than his father's death, that thus hath put him so much from the understanding of himself I cannot dream of. I entreat you both, that being of so young days brought up with him, and sit so neighbour to his youth and behaviour, that you vouchsafe your rest here in our court some little time, so by your companies to draw him on to pleasures, and to gather so much as from occasion you may glean, whether aught to us unknown afflicts him thus, that opened lies within our remedy. Let me continue with the Queen's lines also. Good gentlemen, he hath much talked of you, and sure I am, two men there is not living, to whom he more adheres. If it will please you to show us so much gentry and goodwill, as to expend your time with us a while, for the supply and profit of our hope, your visitation shall receive such thanks as fits a king's remembrance. I just want you to pay very close attention to these two portions of lines spoken by the king and the queen to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Now, this is a place where both the king and the queen want to convince both Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to really spy on Hamlet without letting them know that they are going to be spies. They're going to use them as spies without their knowledge. So they have to be really showing off, they have to really manifest a kind of a concern for Hamlet. They should show to these two that the king and the queen are really concerned about Hamlet. That's what they want Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to believe. And they have to use a certain kind of a language. Now, pay close attention. The number of sibilant sounds, the sibilant sounds, that the one that starts with sounds, just notice how frequent those sounds are in these two lines. So I'm going to stress on the sibilant sounds as I read. And when you read, sibilant sounds are very seductive. They are very, sexy. To even the word sexy, if you look at it, it's got two sibilant sounds, and they kind of invite somebody to be convinced of, to be, completely allured, enamored by you. And so he is almost, the king and the queen are seducing both Ros and Gil into believing. So seduction need not be sexually seduced. What the serpent did to Eve is seduction of a certain kind. There may not be, a sexual deception there, but of anything. So here that deception is going to take place, and look at how the sibilant sounds are ordered here. So let me read it with stress on all the sir sounds. Welcome, dear Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Moreover, that we much did long to see you, the need we have to use you did provoke our hasty sending. Something have you heard of Hamlet's transformation? So call it. Sith nor the exterior nor the inward man resembles that it was, what it should be, more than his father's death, that thus hath put him so much from the understanding of himself I cannot dream of. I entreat you both, that being of so young days, brought up with him, and sit so neighboured to his youth and behaviour, that you vouchsafe your rest here in our court some little time, so by your companies to draw him on to pleasures, and to gather so much as from occasion you may glean, whether aught to us unknown afflicts him thus, that opened lies within our remedy. And look at the queen. Good gentleman, he hath much talked of you, and sure I am two men there is not living, to whom he more adheres. If it will please you to show us so much gentry, look at that, to show us so much gentry and goodwill, as to expend your time with us a while, for the supply and profit of our hope. And I want you to really pay attention for the last two lines. Your visitation shall receive such thanks as fits a king's remembrance. Look at that one more time. Your visitation shall receive such thanks as fits a king's remembrance. It's it's not unconscious. This amount of, you know, uh, focus on the repetition of the sounds are just cannot happen without conscious attempt at ordering those sounds in that manner. Why do I say that? I'm not saying it just because it's here like this. In Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard, those characters, the Ross and Gill in Stoppard's plays, they really like this line and they want to say it again. Well put, right? Your visitation shall receive such thanks as fits a king's remembrance. That's very dramatic. The language is dramatic, the sounding is so good, and it also functions within the story, within the situation of the story, to convince Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. I now suspect even the naming of those two fellows, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, there are almost two vowel sounds, sibilant sounds in those lines, in their very names, is quite consciously done by Shakespeare. It appears so. So many things that needs to be looked at very seriously. And likewise, if you look at another line where Macbeth is talking about Banquo, he's got a little cold war with Banquo. He says, "My fears in Banquo stick deep." So if you look at stick deep, it's like, look at the vowel sounds in stick deep. It's like e, and it's an order that has a following, and that kind of makes it really dramatic. If you say these lines, they have some drama within it. So that's where I think the first point of looking at the language, both at a semantic and a dramatic level, operate. Let me push through the next points quite faster. Sagar, can you tell me how much time do I have?
Sir, I think we can go on till 8:45.
All right, great, thank you. Right, so looking for the playwright and the dramatist. So there is a theater that's happening on stage. There is a lot of theater that's happening off stage in a Shakespeare play. So like I told you about the overall structure of a play, the length of a play, the ordering of scenes. Now, if you look at Macbeth, there is an example that I'll give you for the ordering of scenes. I think in the second act or in the third act, somewhere after the murder is committed, there is a scene where Macduff comes knocking at the door, and the porter is supposed to open the door. Macduff has to come in and then ask for Macbeth, where is your master? And then they have to go and see in the room and be surprised that Duncan is murdered. That should be the scene. But the previous scenes are so heavy, both for the audience and for the actors. We want a little moment of that seriousness. And because it's also a very short play, you cannot really have a scene where entire play is very serious. You need a little break from that. And a comic relief, we understand, is not just a comic relief in Shakespeare. It does something else. It makes a commentary about the whole play, uh, and then also hands it over to the rest of the play. It functions like a bridge between the first part and the second part of the play. And also it makes references to the immediate issues that are taking place in London, the politics, the culture, the people. All those criticism is involved in that part as well. What I'm interested in the Porter scene, where I would like to take the playwright out of Shakespeare here, is that he places at such a point where the murder has taken place, but it is yet to be found out by anybody. Only audience know, and Macbeth and Lady Macbeth know the murder has taken place. No one has yet found out about the murder. Now there are two things here. Murder has taken place. Even the murder, if you see, the scene in murder, the murder scene does not take place on stage. We'll come to the theater off stage part. What happens is this: just before murdering Duncan, Macbeth tells his servant, "Go and tell your lady, that is Lady Macbeth, when my drink is ready to ring the bell." Let's begin from there. He says to the boy, "Sirrah, go and tell your lady to ring the bell when my drink is ready, and you go to sleep," so that he won't be awake when they are doing the murder. The boy leaves. And then Macbeth starts to what you call a monologue, a soliloquy. It goes on. And as it ends, towards the end of that monologue, he hears the bell. That means the drink is ready. Now, when the drink is ready, Lady Macbeth has completely made the chamber guards also drunk. She has also drunk, and she's probably gotten it ready for Macbeth as well. When Macbeth hears this bell ringing, he continues 4 lines after that. He says to Duncan, "Hear it not, Duncan, hear it not. That bell should not wake you up, because it is a death knell to you." So a bell that is only at a reality level is going to indicate that the drink is ready. Macbeth wants to interpret it as a death knell to Duncan's murder. So that's in fact Shakespeare taking a sound that means only a flat, your drink is ready, a signal, into a sign now. Signal has become a sign now of sign of Duncan's death knell itself. Now Macbeth goes off stage. That means he has gone to murder Duncan. On stage, what's going to happen? Lady Macbeth comes. She starts talking to the audience, and she starts telling the audience, "What hath made them drunk hath made me bold." That means I have given this drink to those two fellows. They are fully drunk and they are sponged out and they are completely out, flat. So my husband can do the job. So she has also drunk a little bit so that she'll be bold and able to face the situation, because she hasn't murdered anyone perhaps so far. So this is the first time. So she has also taken something and she is telling, "What hath made them drunk hath made me bold." And as she's talking, she can hear the owl shriek. So the bell at one level, owl is shrieking, the second sound. Okay. Now, when she hears the owl shrieking, she becomes a little upset and she says, "Oh, this owl shrieking can be a bad omen. And I fear that my husband did not complete the job." Just when she's talking about that, Macbeth enters. When Macbeth enters, she is startled. Macbeth is also startled. In fact, both of them get afraid of each other for a moment, because they're in the most, rarest of rarest moments in their lives. When Macbeth comes, and they both of them settle down thinking, "Oh, it's you, oh, it's you." At that time, Macbeth says, "I have done the deed." So he went off, he did the deed, and he came. Now his hands are bloody, and his the dagger is full of blood. All those things are there. Now audience have to imagine the murder, the goriness of the murder, whatever, however terrible, how did the blood go, how did it become, all those things, they are not shown to us. What Shakespeare does is he creates a stage in the mind of the audience, and he commits that murder on the stage, which is in the mind of the audience. It is the powerful way to take up something. How can you show murder? Sometimes it can become so clumsy. So the best thing to do is finish it off stage, as if. So I'm just wondering practically, what will this fellow who played Duncan would be doing off stage? He would not be dead. He would probably be having coffee, because after that, he has no role in the play. Now, if I was Duncan and I would be murdered in this scene, I'm done. My scenes are over. I'm not there in the play anymore. I'm going to sit in one corner and probably have a coffee. So that's probably what's happening in reality off stage. But what's happening in the mind of the audience? They would imagine the murder. This is vintage Shakespeare for me, uh, to create that kind of a moment. In reality, it's probably a cool moment that's happening, but in the mind of the audience, they can imagine anything, because Macbeth is saying, "With bloodied hands and a bloodied dagger, I have done the deed." And then they talk about the sound. The owl shrieked. And as they start talking about that, she says, "Now look, you go back to bed, think of it as nothing. Wash these hands, wash your hands, and you'll be all right. We'll see everything. Let's go to bed. They go off to bed. At that point of time, there is a knocking that starts. And the knocking is continuing. Knocking is continuing, and then next scene begins. And in the next scene, a porter is talking, having heard the knocking at the door, and he doesn't open it, but continues to talk. Imagine himself as the hell porter, porter at the hell gate. When people come into hell, he is either opening or not opening it for them. He imagines this is a standard motif in the morality plays, where people go to hell and there is a hell porter. He will either allow them or not allow them. There is a bit of a conversation that will be going on. So that motif is there, and Shakespeare enlarges that moment. And then that porter is imagining a kind of a mono acting about somebody coming in. An English tailor comes in, a carpenter comes in, an equivocator comes in, a few people like that, 2 or 3 people he imagines, does a little bit of a mono act, and the knocking is going on. And for the knock knock, he's acting something. At the knock knock, he's acting something. The whole play has stopped, and a new play has started about this porter, really critical of the English public, a tailor and an equivocator and somebody else for that matter. And once he does his little mini play within that, he opens the door, Macduff comes in, and then the rest of the play. Now you can see from the ring for the bell to the owl's shriek, then the knocking. This whole sound is constantly there at the back of this scene, and this is more like the sound of a heartbeat. And so the whole background sound has got something to give to the whole scene, and a dramatic impact. And it's not just a BGM; it's also part of the story, because Macbeth has asked Lady Macbeth to ring the bell, and then owl has shrieked. That was a real thing. Knocking on the door is also a real thing, but it's also a background. So at two levels, it's quite dramatic from the Shakespeare's point of view, creating that kind of a moment of drama. Now, another moment of drama that he creates, we can move into the moment of drama. So what I earlier talked about is the playwright part of it, how he places that in between so that all the actors are relaxed. Only the porter is there on stage, and everyone's now coming back. Even the audience are relaxed. They have gotten that comic relief, and then the play can start to become serious again. That's the role of a playwright. Now, the role of a dramatist, we can see, he creates a scene where there is so much of drama that it will really impact the moving of the play. For example, when the witches, when they meet in the third scene, they talk about, hey, where you were, sister, where did I go, all those things. And towards the end of their portion, they are singing a song, 3 times 3, 9, all those things they're singing, and go around and round. And just as then when they finish the song, Macbeth and Banquo enter the stage. Now their presence, the witches' presence on stage and the singing and doing the routine, you can imagine it as having cast a spell. Now the air is charged, the space of the stage is charged with the evil spell cast by the witches, into which Macbeth and Banquo enter. And that's the first line that Macbeth says, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. Which means he has entered into the spell, the space, the spell, or the space that is filled with the spell that the witches created. This moment is very dramatic because they entered into this space. If you look at it spatially, earlier it could have been, earlier scene was in a court, earlier scene to that was witches meeting somewhere on a heath. So spatially also you can see Shakespeare using drama, the dramatist there. If you see in the previous scene, Duncan is talking about MacDonald, the traitor, and he says, this traitor MacDonald, I never thought he would turn against me. I don't know how to find a traitor in the face. He says, there is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. That's a beautiful line. There is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. Just when he says this about MacDonald, right? I put an absolute trust on him and he turned against me. Just when he's about, as he's saying these lines, Macbeth enters on stage. And then he says, "Oh, worthy cousin, loyal servant," and something like that. Very ironic at that moment. This is called dramatic irony there. Because we know by now that Macbeth has started to contemplate some kind of a action against Duncan. And so this moment is very dramatic. Who enters on stage at what time? Who leaves the stage at what time? Imagine Brutus and uh, Antony in that scene when they give their monologues. Brutus gives his monologue, and then he's convincing the audience that Caesar was ambitious, and that is why I killed him. And he says, who is here so vile that will not be a Roman? Who is here so base that will be a slave? If any speak, him have I offended. And then he says, I pause for a reply. Who's here? He's asking. And all the members in the public, they say, none, Brutus, none, Brutus, none. He gets down. He tells, Antony wants to say a few lines. Let him speak to you guys. And then you can bury Caesar, whatever. And then Brutus goes out of the stage. He goes back to his home. He's not there. If Brutus was there, the play could have become different. Absence of Brutus is what makes Antony take the power from the people. He starts to become emotional, and then he starts to talk to people in an emotional way. And you can see he ends the line like this: my heart is in the coffin with Caesar, and I must pause. Brutus said, I pause for a reply, very logical. He said, my heart is in the coffin with Caesar, and I must pause before whatever happens. This turns the audience away from Brutus against, and it turns them against Brutus and the play for Antony, and the play goes in that direction. Just because Brutus was absent, he left the stage. If he was there, Brutus could have gotten another opportunity, perhaps to reconvince his audience to himself. That's good. So this is the part where we kind of look at Shakespeare's the dramatist in him. So that's the second part. Let me briefly look at the third and the fourth. In 5 minutes we can stop. Look at the opening scenes of many of his plays. Are very interesting. When shall we three meet again? Is the first line of Macbeth, scene 1, act 1. It begins with a question. Hamlet begins with what ho? Now, when something begins with a question, it's very interesting because the question is not only to the character on stage. The question, if something starts with a question, it assumes something that has happened already. That is always, Shakespeare is quite aware of the beginnings of his scenes or his plays. He always begins assuming that some action had already taken place. And the already taken place action, which is not shown on stage, is more powerful, assumably, in an assumed manner. The action that would have already taken place, a continuation of which we are introduced to in the middle of, in medias res, as they say, that seems, whatever happened before seems more powerful, more dramatic than what is taking place now. That is, in other words, playing with the mind of the audience. His mind, the real stage, Shakespeare's stage, is in the mind of the audience. How he plays with the mind of the audience. And that's why, when shall we three meet again? That means they have met earlier, and now plan is to meet again. And what ho? It's complete darkness, and somebody says, "What? Oh, you don't know what's happening." There is this complete mystery in the beginning of Hamlet, and then you can see that mystery at some level or the other, philosophically, dramatically, character-wise, plot-wise, story-wise, so much of mystery in Hamlet that we are not able to really crack it open for all these centuries. What hope? Okay, it's almost after reading Shakespeare, after reading Hamlet, we can still say what it kind of carries or gains that much of a significance, that line. Now, is execution done on Carter is the beginning of one of the scenes in Shakespeare's Hamlet, no, Macbeth, and you can see that means he has already given the order to murder Carter, and then that question he's asking. In Measure for Measure, I think this is the third scene of first act. This is the Duke telling the father, "No, holy father." This is the beginning of the scene. "No, holy father, throw away that thought." So that means the Holy Father had said something about, "Hey, why are you leaving the dukedom to, and what is his name, Angelo? Are you in love with somebody? Is it a romantic escapade that you're at?" And that kind of discussion must have happened earlier, and it reached a point uh, where the Duke is kind of lost it. He says, "No, Holy Father, throw away that thought." It starts like that. So it's like Shakespeare has written the scene and then picked up half of the scene, thrown it out, and then started from here. It's almost like that. Even if you read the letter that Macbeth writes to Lady Macbeth, and Lady Macbeth begins to read it on stage, it's from the middle of it. It's all nobody starts like that. If he loves his wife so much, he should be writing "Dear wife," "Dear love," "Dear lady," whatever, and then the niceties would have been there. "I miss you," and all those things, and then the actual content should come. But that's all not necessary for the audience. But by beginning to start in the middle, Shakespeare indicates of something more powerful that could have happened, and that really puts the mind of the audience to think about those things. So it kind of carries that amount of weight when you enter in the middle. Likewise, this Isabella, brother of Claudio in Measure for Measure, when she wants to enter the nunnery, she goes in, and this is the opening of that scene, which says, "Have you nuns no farther privileges?" Now, that question is a very powerful question. It can mean that she wants more privileges, or she wants to know that she wants to be really cloistered and really go into the nunnery and not have those privileges. So, and you see the conversation goes that way. But the question, beginning with question, is that there have been some questions and answers between the nun and the one of the novices, and now as part of those things, this is one of the questions. So that's how we can look at the opening scenes and the scene openings. Now, stage directions within the text, I'll take 2-3 minutes and stop it. Uh, you can see when Banco is talking about the witches, he talks about how they look. They have beards, they have chopped fingers, and their nails are like this, and talking about their costumes in a certain way. Now, if you read Banco's description the uh, of the witches, you can actually draw the picture of the witches based on which you can derive the costumes. You can design the costumes based on the description that Banco gives. So we don't have to really think about what kind of dress that we should give to the witches. Banco gives us the clue. Likewise, Ophelia gives us the clue for Hamlet to walk, how to walk while he's in an antic disposition. I mean, his knees are knocking against each other, and he's looking as if as he's looking through someone and not really looking at her, and how his shoulders are. This kind of, even for an actor to get hints as to how to present himself with his body playing Hamlet at a certain portion of the play, you can go to Ophelia's description of how he did all of those things. So this is what I look for while I read Shakespeare, and this is what helps me to look at the dramatic side, exclusively looking at the texts. Now, the critics are important. Mostly the critics give us a very philosophical, critical, and relevant, mostly like, if it is relevant to certain cultures, certain other, contexts, those are things that we find in the critics. But if you're interested in Shakespeare purely for the drama of it, then I think we can find it in the texts and when we read texts. So this is how reading Shakespeare functions for me. So thank you so much, the Frogs Theatre, for this opportunity. Sorry for taking some more time, but I thought this is the things that I had to share with you. Thank you, guys.